Hello? On behalf of the foundation of Wayne Community College, I welcome you to this celebration of the new anthology, Crossing the Rift, North Carolina Poets on 9/11 and its Aftermath. I'm Margaret Booth Bedour of the Foundation's Arts and Humanities Advisory Committee. Thank you for being a part of the Foundation's Spring Speakers Series. A statewide gathering took place this past September on 9/12 near the headquarters of the book's publisher, Press 53. Ever since, the anthology of over 100 North Carolina poets has enjoyed acclaim at various events around the state. We have tonight a contingent of noted poets from Eastern North Carolina, from Benson, from East Carolina University, in Greenville, from Ayden down the road. We are disappointed that Leonard D. Moore of Shaw University could not be here at the last minute. We will miss his dynamic presentation of poetry, this champion haiku writer whose poetry has been translated around the world. Now, before I introduce the two editors to tell you about the inception and the inspiration behind our book, Crossing the Rift, I know you are wondering, what is a rift? Suggested on the book's cover by the famous French tightrope walker Philippe Petit as he crossed from one World Trade Center to the other. In the Oxford English Dictionary, the Scandinavian noun means a cleft, a chasm in the earth, a split, crack in another object, and the verb to rift, means to form fissures and clefts, to gape open, to split. Let's us think about this imagery in our sober, serious, and thoughtful book about 9/11, and listen to the poets as they translate life into art. I'm going to read the introductions from the biographical sketches in the back of our book. I think they said it as well as I can. Just give me a minute here. My old friend Joseph Bathanti. We're still youthful, right? Still youthful. My former friend, and still is, poet Joseph Bathanti, is the former Poet Laureate of North Carolina from 2012 to 14, and the recipient of the North Carolina Award in Literature. But get this, he is the author of 17 books. That's pretty amazing. Bathanti is McFarland Family Distinguished Professor of Interdisciplinary Education at Appalachian State University. He served as the 2016 Charles George VA Medical Center Writer in Residence in Asheville, North Carolina, and is the co-founder of the Medical Center's Creative Writing Program. We look forward to hearing from you, Joseph.
Thank you, Margaret. I'm really glad to be here. I've been here before. I've been to Goldsboro, and I love it. I've been to Wayne County. I've been in this auditorium, and love everything about this locale. And I'm really thankful that you're here tonight. But what I'd like to do before I get started with my remarks is today is the 54th anniversary of the assassination of Martin Luther King, Jr., who reminded us long ago that we shall overcome because the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. And so much of this book is about justice. So what I'd like, before we get started, is a moment of silence for Martin Luther King Jr. and all he's taught us, all he stood for, also for the victims of 9/11, for all the people dying in the siege of Ukraine, especially for the civilians. So if we just, for a moment or two, thank you. When David Potorti and I initially set out our call to submit to Crossing the Rift, North Carolina Poets on 9/11 and its aftermath, the anthology we've co-edited, we salted in the following. As you contemplate your poem, consider this. 20 years later, no matter how you were touched by 9/11, that moment continues to resonate. There are so many lenses through which to view it, and such vast associated collateral fallout to consider. It was a day that seemed to set the agenda for the 21st century, seeding Islamophobia, the vilification of immigrants, and in the undocumented, ramped up xenophobia, nationalism, and isolationism. It unleashed war and supercharged military budgets that continue to impoverish our nation with accompanying losses of community, health, hope, and concurrent rises in homophobia, transphobia, virulent racism, and domestic terrorism. Those 4 sentences served as not only a précis of what we envisioned as the anthology's eventual core, but also as a free-ranging prompt for those casting about for a point of entry into a poem about 9/11 and the centrifugal waves that are still emanating from its center. We posed the kind of existential question, where were you on 9/11 and where are you now, physically and psychically, and invited poets to think dimensionally, even impressionistically about 9/11, to dig into the personal, but also the radiational and associational valence of 9/11, how it has, in very palpable ways, metamorphosed our world and set the agenda for the 21st century. We challenge poets to reimagine their relationships not only with the actual moment of 9/11 and the generational cataclysm it represents, but also how 9/11 changed their relationships with the world and their communities, and perhaps most importantly, how it influenced their poetics, their central preoccupation as poets, and what the great poet Larry Levis termed the crucial past. David and I, in that original call, also invoked Carolyn Forche, in which she dubs the poetry of witness, poetry as activism, documentary testimony, and the pledge to honor shared humanity and dignity in social and restorative justice. Powerful and crucial poems that peer unflinchingly into the heart of darkness and insist that we never forget. Each poem in Crossing the Rift champions the indomitability of the human spirit and its dogged instinct toward healing, how people have gone on and endured hope and beauty and unity in a rallying cry to allow our better angels to prevail, the relentless belief that love is the only antidote for heartache, that story is more important than recrimination, that language is a sacrament. There are so many breathtaking poems about simply staggering through that day and the days to come. At the literal end of the day, Tuesday, September 11th, 2001, there were babies to nurse and bathe in bed and elderly parents to tend. The following Wednesday was another working day into which many of us, diminished and confused without any real notion of how it had been changed for all time by the previous 24 hours, ventured. There are so many of those poems. Thus, because of the diversity of poets and their respective acculturations, their lived lives, the colors of their skin, their ancestry, faith traditions, and sexual orientations, their often complex relationships with America, the book organically took on an identity of its own. As Robert Frost declared, no surprise for the writer, no surprise for the reader. David and I were surprised at every turn, thoroughly astonished at the yield. Powerful thanks to all the poets, and especially the poets on the stage tonight, my good friends, each of them. Thanks to Press 53 and Kevin Watson, its editor, who didn't bat an eye when we took this project to him. And finally, to David Potorti, my co-editor, my great friend. We never skipped a beat, never hit a bump, smooth as silk, such a great gift to me personally, which underscored what I already knew about him, that he is a true and good man who deeply believes in peace. And Margaret, are you going to introduce David?
Yeah.
Good.
Okay. Oh, you go. Okay. For those out in TV land who are watching a recording, one piece of my talk it floated down to the floor of the auditorium, and it's being given back right now. Thank you. Something unusual always happens. Now I'm going to tell you, you already talked about David Portorti with great reverence and love, Joseph, and I'm going to read his biographical sketch at the end of our book, Crossing the Rift, 197. David Portorti is the co-founder of September 11th Families for Peaceful Tomorrow. He served as the literature and theater director for the North Carolina Arts Council and is active in One Wake, a nonpartisan, multi-ethnic, multi-issue group of religious congregations, associations, and other nonprofits in the Wake County, North Carolina area, implementing systemic changes within society to achieve the common goal. Amazing work you're involved in. David, tell us some more.
Well, thank you, Margaret, and thanks to Wayne Community College and the Foundation for inviting us here tonight and hosting us. It's really nice to get out east. You know, I don't get out east much, but it's great to see friends out here. Thank you, Joseph. You are so dedicated to the literary life of our state, and he was so essential in the creation of this anthology because he just knows everybody. He's taught everywhere. He's been around forever, and just so easy to work with him. And when he was North Carolina Poet Laureate a few years ago, I just loved talking to him every day and just learning what was going on with him. And thanks again to Press 53, as Joseph said, for memorializing the 20th anniversary of September 11th with this really, really nice anthology. I also want to acknowledge today's commemoration of Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination. It was in October of 2001 that I hooked up with a handful of other people who had lost family members on September 11th, as I did, and decided that we wanted to speak out and start an organization that would talk about alternatives to terrorism and violence and war, and create some fellowship with other folks around the world that were suffering from those afflictions as well. And we needed a name, so I went to my bookshelf, and somehow I was intuitively drawn to some books from our Reverend King, and I developed a really long list of possible names from some of his quotes, and one of the quotes that really struck me was one that he had said about the war in Vietnam. The past is prophetic in that it asserts loudly that wars are poor chisels for carving out peaceful tomorrows. And so we have him to thank for our group's name, September 11th Families for Peaceful Tomorrows. And I think those words were pretty prophetic, right? We just keep seeing this over and over again. And around 2004, I edited a book about our group, which later got translated into Japanese. And the reason it got translated into Japanese is that there was a minister in Japan who belonged to some sort of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. society in Tokyo, and he recognized the quote that we used for our title, and he reached out to us and he translated the book into Japanese for us, and it actually went into a second printing in Japan because there actually is a peace movement there. So we're very happy about that. And interestingly, Hiroshima in Japan is one of the only cities outside of North America that actually commemorates Martin Luther King Day, as we did, I guess, in February. King was going to visit there, but he was assassinated just before going. He was going to go a couple months after his assassination. So it is hard to believe it's been 20 years. The anniversary came and went last year, and every year the amount of attention that it gets sort of smaller and smaller and shorter, and I guess that's normal for something that happened 20 years ago. But as Joseph talked about, I think it's important to remember that for a lot of people, 9/11 is not over. It's still happening, and it's important to remember not just that day, but the outcomes of that day, which continue in the way that we interact with each other and how we think about the world. And I think the poetry in this anthology helps us to do that, and it helps us to memorialize the humanity behind the statistics and the numbers that we hear on the news. And as a 9/11 family member, I want you to know that the words of you poets, you guys, have meant a lot to me and continue to mean a lot to me, so thank you. I know that our readers tonight are going to read their poem from the anthology as well as one additional poem from the book. So I will begin with the A's, Malika King Albrecht, and I will introduce her. She is serving, are you still serving as the inaugural Heart of Pamlico Poet? Oh, they have a new one. Well, you were the inaugural Heart of Pamlico Poet Laureate. She's the author of 4 poetry books. Her most recent is The Stumble Fields on Main Street Rag. She is the founding editor of Red-Headed Stepchild, an online magazine that only accepts poems that have been rejected by everybody else. Which is a great idea. Please welcome Malika King Albrecht.
Thank you for allowing that. That's perfect. Thank you. First off, I want to thank the editors for including my poem and for coming up with this idea. And the range of poets in this anthology is amazing. Also, I want to thank Margaret for getting us together. This is my first reading in ages. It's really good to see people. I'm glad y'all are here. I'm going to read first a poem by Catherine Kirkpatrick, and it's called After Zazen, and it was one of the poems. There's so many, it was really hard to choose, but I knew she wasn't going to be here, so I'm going to read it. After Zazen. 3 boys in England swallowed stones, he said, and had to have their stomachs cut and sewn. Not pumped? I didn't ask. So heavy, stones. They must be fetched even when they've been thrown down throats that young and small. You can't blame them. They want so much to die. And no one asked anything anymore. We didn't want to know them. The boys who made heaviness manifest. That morning our country had invaded another country. We felt bereft, ashamed. The Buddhist priest finished his story. We saw how suffering woke to find itself alive again, famished. And I was really very happy to have this poem included. I wrote it for my significant other, so it does have a little epigraph. For Tony, 82nd Airborne, Iraqi Freedom, 2003. Because a doorway can be an ambush. When you're in the shop, the gritting sound of the metal grinder, flinting fire into the air, or the arc of light flashing blue, hot above the well pool to form a joint. I stand outside the open doorway, calling your name, waiting for you to turn and lift the dark shield of your welding helmet to see me, known and unarmed. I wait to see your shoulders soften before I cross the threshold.
What a pleasure to introduce Margaret Bedour right here in Goldsboro. Margaret and Phil, for me, seem synonymous with Goldsboro. And I, again, the first time I came here was because of Margaret. And I mentioned Phil, who coincidentally is wearing a Carolina blue sweater tonight out there. But we go way back. I met Margaret on the campus of St. Andrews College in the middle 80s. And, you know, we've been friends ever since, and I've looked up to her ever since. She was very much, as I was, you know, attempting to get some kind of foothold in poetry in North Carolina, Margaret was among, you know, the cherished and established poets. So the friendships just meant everything over the years. Our kids kind of grew up together, far apart, but we have.
Our kids didn't marry each other, though.
Yeah, they didn't. That was the plan, but it just didn't work out. Margaret Booth Bedour is the author of A Murmuration of Purrs, Easy Magic, and Scheherazade. Among her awards are the North Carolina Poet Laureate Award and the Charlotte Writers Award. Her poems have been published in many, many literary magazines, and she has taught creative writing and directed readers' theater for all ages. And she taught here for years and years and was a very important member of the humanities here at Wayne Community College. And you know, we wouldn't have this event here this evening if it wasn't for all the hard work of Margaret. And again, I'm very thankful for that and for the college and the foundation sponsoring us. No Bloodshed During Snowfalls from Scheherazade, St. Andrews University Press. And again, all the poets will read their poems and one other. Please welcome your very own Margaret Bedour.
Well, they haven't run me out of town yet. I thought it would open to my poem automatically. Shoot. Well, now I've got to find it. I think it blew off the stand too, probably. I said 121, no wonder. Okay, thank you. All right. No bloodshed during snowfall. This quote comes from the Associated Press, January 12, 2008. The snow-dusted neighborhoods, Shiite and Sunni alike, faintly falling, as James Joyce wrote, like the descent of their last end, the living and the dead. A flurry is a swift and passing joy. The long-haired Filipino kid with dolorous eyes sits up front with me. Two more and a small Chinese girl, Suk Lee, called Shirley, ride in back. We have feasted on Lebanese food at Neomond, kibbeh, tabbouleh, labin, and studied together for hours at the North Carolina Museum of Art. Roman torsos, Egyptian heads, African masks, Melanesian pipes, a Wyeth House, and O'Keefe Church, early American portraits. Those men, Shirley pointed to three bewigged people on the wall, look like your founding fathers. The black security guard has taken our laughing picture before a mobile with flowers and butterflies shaped like a fighter plane. Now the radio says that it has snowed in Baghdad after 80 years. We pass a row of crab apple trees blooming pink in January. A flurry is a swift and passing joy. And I want to share a poem by the poet Sarah Lindsay. I deliberately picked a woman, Malika, because there were so many men in this group. How do you know that? How do you know that so well? Okay, here we go. The poem is called Knock Music, introduces us to an elderly couple playing music on string instruments and remembering another catastrophic event in history, the Glasnost, perpetrated by the Nazis against the Jews in Berlin. Like him, she is old. Her neck curves like the violins, whose long, harsh kiss shows on her jaw when she turns to the tuning fork she spanked on her knee, her pursed lips drawing in the long, thin A. Beethoven tonight? Mozart, Haydn, Brahms? She gloats absently over the sheets to his usual shrug. He goes back to touching the cello strings with his thumbs. She lifts her bow, and its hair falls loose from the frog, like a girl's. Ah, it's always something, isn't it? How we play such things, such fragile things, I don't know. They could fall apart in our hands. With her second bow, she tunes again. He doesn't see her rosin it. Bent over the cello's shutter, he has the sense of remembering Berlin, the night a bomb buried the bridegroom and all but one of his friends, the night he knelt outside his gaping home and heard the grand piano fall 5 floors, heard its last 5 monstrous chords that blotted out for years all the Bach he knew. Mozart, then, he says, and so they play.
John Hoppenthaler. His books of poetry are Domestic Garden, Anticipate the Coming Reservoir, and Lives of Water, all with Carnegie Mellon University Press. He has co-edited a volume of essays on the poetry of Jean Valentine, This World Company. He is a professor of creative writing and literature at East Carolina University. A Jar of Rain, which is his poem, is from Anticipate the Coming Reservoir, which is also on Carnegie Mellon University Press. Please welcome John Hoppenthaler.
So I'd like to, of course, thank all the folks up here on stage and all of you for being here, and I'm glad to be in Goldsboro again. It's been a while. I think I was here once while I was the Eastern Regional Chapel professor or something like that. Gilbert Chapel, that's right. A couple of things I'd like to say first. Joe was mentioning, like, where were you on September 11th? And some of you may know that for 9 years I was Toni Morrison's personal assistant. And I was with Toni Morrison in her home on September 11th. And if you're interested in learning a little bit about that, you can kind of Google my name and Toni's name and New York Magazine, and that essay that I published there that contains some of that stuff is there. I also want to say that a few days after September 11th, one of my mentors, William Hann, a wonderful poet, got in touch with me and said he was editing an anthology like this one of September 11th poems. And I replied and said, I don't know that I can. This is just so, I don't know how to even process this. I don't know. I can't say that I can, right? But a few days later, my computer crashed, and that led me to write a poem that actually does appear in the anthology called September 11th, 2001, American Writers Respond from Etruscan Press. So if you're interested in kind of getting a box set of all of these anthologies, you can probably find that pretty cheap online somewhere. But then I wrote 2 more, and all 3 of those are in Anticipate the Coming Reservoir, my second book of poems. But this one I'm going to read in a little while is one that is totally imaginative. I spent a lot of time in West Virginia, and I just kind of imagined this West Virginian family and the impacts that this might have had on them. But I'd like to begin my reading with a poem by a wonderful poet, Rose McClarney, who I was lucky enough to meet and spend some time with several years ago when I gave a reading at Auburn University. It's called Winter Hard. When the forest caught fire, the horses obeyed a fear greater than what had been bred into them, broke down the stable, and stampeded for the opening in the trees, which was the lake, which was water. Of course, they headed towards the alternative, liquid, unlike the material that made or was burning up the hard world they had to escape. It was the bombardment of central forces that started the fire in Finland. This is Malapart's story. By his account, hundreds of horses sped through the flames, splashed in, and the second they entered, the lake froze solid, which makes no sense. But never mind science. The idea stays with us. Snap, they were suspended, coated and sealed suddenly, and singly, though the herd had entered as a whole. It could be called tragic because they were entombed, heads up, so all winter, soldiers could see the last shapes failed struggles take. It could be asserted that the animal face, flared nostrils, flung mane, all frozen, is a simplified expression of human experience. Something might be said about that war, what we fight now. But to merit retelling, there need not be double meaning. It's hard enough that a horse had to seek escape and was denied it, even in decay. Divisions are hard, how one side does not see itself in the other, or crystallized, cast in that clear ice. The horror of each is its own, alone, beyond comparison and compassion. The soldiers are said to have walked among the horses like a sculpture garden on their smoke breaks, casually, to be by themselves. Between the bodies, they went to light their little fires. The individual man's flame was too small to make anything melt. Not even summer could turn the sharp edge of this back to water. A jar of rain. Wrapped in threadbare and faded cotton towels, snuggled between the hub and Beth Ann's sneakered feet, the faint sloshing of jarred rainwater, too muffled to hear above road whine and rolling stones on the tape deck. But like some rare and fragile egg, she nestled it there, all 400 long miles east to Manhattan. When her brother left Wheeling, it had been springtime. He allowed how he'd miss it, yearning green mountains, misty Ohio River, and mostly the rain. How it sluiced off Mom's rooftop to collect in brim in an old metal oil drum. How when he would thwack its steel side with his finger, rings would shiver toward dark water's chilly center. He would miss the rain, and they would miss him. Gone to the city, dream job among skyscrapers, the big break of his young life. They'd sung the theme from the Mary Tyler Moore Show together that night he first heard he'd been hired, and flung cloth napkins high at the ceiling. You're gonna make it after all, deflecting off walls and rising like hymnal passages till dawn. Alvin hit a bump. Careful, she hissed, her left leg swiveling on raised toes, hard up against the jar. It was what she could still do, the only thing more, to wash what ashes were left of his, gutter to river to sea, with West Virginia rainfall dipped up from a drum whose surface October had started to freeze over. Mick Jagger was belting out Painted Black. She saw the brimming hole in a skyline she'd never seen before begin to unfold. Thank you.
David and I and Kevin Watson, we read these poems in manuscript, Lord knows how many times, but they always hit me in the head when I hear them read, you know, and that really makes such a difference here. And, you know, John and Margaret and Malika, and I've heard Shelby read his poems, so it's really a treat. We say that all the time, how the word comes alive out of the mouth of the writers, but that's really, really true. And I don't think it's much truer than when they come out of the mouth of Shelby Stevenson, and I think that maybe Shelby and I might have met at St. Andrews too. Ron Bays, who died last year, brought so many poets together. Shelby and Joan and Linda and I and Shelby in the North Carolina poetry community, we've been friends forever and ever. Shelby and I actually walked the same streets of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, years and years ago without knowing it. I was an apprentice hoodlum, and I think Shelby was in graduate school, and we ended up even having the same graduate advisor, but we never crossed paths until years and years later. Shelby, as you know, was the Poet Laureate of North Carolina from 2015 to 2018, and he is a son of this earth, of this very Eastern earth that we stand upon. He's the son of tobacco farmers, and there will never be we'll never have a poet like Shelby again, simply because those times have changed and that earth has changed. And I think the last time Joan and I were in Benson and we ate barbecue at Stevenson's Barbecue, Shelby pointed at the food line and said, "I used to shoot possums there." He was the editor of Pembroke magazine for just years and years and years, and I remember getting my first acceptance there and thinking, like, holy cow, I have really arrived, and I can see, too, Shelby's cribbed, extraordinary writing that I couldn't read, so I handed it to Joan to find out if it was yet another rejection. It turned out that it was an acceptance, and I can see that writing, too. His book, Plank House, all of his books have been really influential to me, but Plank House especially helped me turn a bend. He was the editor of Pembroke magazine for 32 years. He's a member of the Society of Distinguished Alumni, Department of English at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I think I have this right. Shelby's also went to law school, and I can't remember now whether or not he actually practiced law, but he threw it aside to be a poet, a much more lucrative enterprise, as you all know. He's the author of so many books, his most recently, but I bet he has more by now. He's prolific, is Shelby's Lady, the Hog poems, and Shelby has socks on with hogs on them. They're pink and extraordinary. Just like he is. His poem in this book, September Morning, is from The Hunger of Freedom, Red Dashboard Press, 2014, an honor to introduce Shelby Stevenson to you tonight.
Thank you, Joseph Bathanti and David Potorti for editing this book, Crossing the Rift, and Kevin Watson for publishing it at Press 53. I'd like to read a poem by North Carolina's current poet laureate, Jackie Shelton Green. It's on page 76 on 7. It's called Lifting Veils. 11 September 2001. 1. It is a blood-stained horizon whispering, La ilaha illallah, prelude to a balmy evening that envelops our embrace. We stand reaching sands, waters, airs full of blood. In the flash of a distant storm, I see you standing on another shore, torn hijab, billowing towards an unnamed wind. We both wear veils, blood-stained, tear-stained, enshrouding separate truths. 2. Misty morning, teardrops of dust choke and stain lips that do not move, will not utter. It is a morning of shores, sea shadows that caress memory of another time, another veil, another woman, needing, reaching, lifting. 3. Into your eyes I swam, searching for veils. To lift, to wrap, to pierce, dance with veils that elude such mornings, veils that stain such lips, veils tearing like music. 4. It is the covering of spirit, not the body. My hijab, your hijab, connecting, interweaving, crawling, snaking, binding into a sky that will not bend. And my poem is called September Morning. O limbo of life, the wings dapple morning, a twitter in the field, color in the wind, a spider on feet of purest gossamer. Trust goes up in flames, girders change, loved ones, doors strange to touch. All the lovely times sinking in the face of the steely plumes breaking apart, brilliances under the jet so silver and beautiful, gone. The going out, on, lifting dreams, competing for truth, for dear life's sake, holding the screams held together by need. Give me breath, cockleburs on an old man's knees, roses, November leaves, the memory of this place catches us off center, loses hold, and holds to nothing. The world seeming seamless, days of glory, a tapestry of women and men, dawdling and scuffling their shoes, eyeing their toes, knowing there is nothing to say that might lighten the load, turning around, coming back onward, never to finish telling the story. Numb in the name of the fluttering flag. Oh, say, can the tattered one defend the fences fenced around and in and through this century of all times, the way a baby's wrapped in a shawl or shirt for the tucking into the arms, clutching dear life so thin, the stubborn holding on, a giving in. Thank you.
Thank you, Shelby. And I would like to read a poem by Rebecca McClanahan in the anthology, and this is called Early Morning Downtown 1 Train. In this car packed with closed faces, this tube of light tunneling through darkness, two sleeping boys so close I could touch them without reaching, their smooth brown faces, planed cheekbones like Peruvian steps leading from or to some beautiful ruin, boys so alike they must be brothers, and the small worried man they sprawl against, too young to seem so old, father. How far have they come? How far to go? They sleep as only loved children sleep, wholly, no need to tighten or clutch to fold themselves in. Their heads are thrown back, mouths open, no, agape, which looks like agape, the highest form of love, some minister told me long ago. As if love is a cupboard of lower and higher shelves, and why bother reaching if you have hands like the hands of this young father, cracked and blistered, stamped with the pattern of shovel or pick? For someone must do our digging and rise in the dark to dress the children carefully as these boys are dressed, and pack their knapsacks, and ease out of the seat without waking the open-mouthed younger one, nor the older whose head now rests fully on the emptied seat. But my God, I think, as the brakes squeal and the father moves quickly to face the door, he is leaving these children, a father leaving his children. The train slows at 50th and he presses his body against the door, lifting his arms above his head. A signal, surrender, as the door slides open and a woman steps in, small and dark, like the father, her body lost in a white uniform. She touches his sleeve, something passes between their eyes, not sadness exactly, but ragged exhaustion, frayed edges meeting, his night, her day, her night, his day, goodbye, hello. She slides onto the seat, lifting one son's head to her lap. His mouth is still open, his body limp. She smooths his collar, her small hands move to his lips, closing them gently, the way one closes the mouth of the recently dead, but the boy is not dead, just sleeping, an arm thrown over his brother, his mother near. And this is my contribution to the anthology, and it is called Jim. 1. I walk New York's dirty streets all day with a 35mm camera in my hand, heat rising from creosote subways, taking pictures of buildings. Their taut geometry, their parallel lines rising into the sky, led me to a metal door that opened onto the roof of the World Trade Center. It was 1975, a year after high-wire artist Philippe Petit stepped off and walked to the other tower. The view this day wasn't so hot, just a stiff wind and a skyline that seemed removed from the rest of Manhattan, unguarded, alone. 25 years later, my brother Jim would have an office there. 2. Nobody told a joke better than Jim. We lived in the city at the same time, swapping intel on oddball restaurants, street fairs, and art shows. He took me to see Koyaanisqatsi, Life Out of Balance, an auteur film that took a hammer to skyscrapers and other embodiments of our mad world. Clouds casting shadows on natural vistas contrasted with crowds sleepwalking and Times Square conformity. Escalators at the World Trade Center were filmed in accelerated, furious motion upward as the kinetic neon of cars traced lines below. A rocket headed skyward exploded, spinning to Earth in flames. 3. Jim was upstate with his wife on Labor Day weekend, visiting our folks and kayaking on Cayuga Lake for the first time. A week later, he was back in his office in the North Tower, hanging in after a downsizing for his stocks to bounce back on his way to an early retirement. I'd left the city long ago and was standing in my southern yard, a cup of coffee in hand, when the first plane hit. They never did find his body. 4. A piece of bone got picked off the sorter at Freshkills landfill where they took the tower debris, which is why I was at the New York Medical Examiner's office, its pale municipal green walls like every classroom cop show or city hall on TV. I heard her high heels echoing off the walls as she approached. Blunt force trauma, she said, explaining how my brother got small enough to fit into a test tube. I went out a side door and got blasted by smoke off a barbecue grill, hot dogs and sausages simmering in flames for guys still on the pile. 5. Hibakusha, A-bomb elders from Japan, came to New York to see another ground zero. When Hiroshima and Nagasaki vanished, they remained by coincidence or miracle to bear witness forever after with their wounded lives. You lost 2 buildings, one of them said. We lost 2 cities. I lost the world. I lost my brother. 6. St. Paul's Chapel, tiny sanctuary in the shadow of the towers, survived the maelstrom of the collapse and played host to the rescue crews. The following spring, I was in its backyard cemetery and heard birds in the trees. When scraps of paper ticker taped down, they built nests. 7. A flatbed truck bowed under the weight of a New York Fire Department bell at the 9/11 commemoration. Ring a bell for the person you lost, they said. I put down my newspapers, felt for the heavy clapper below, and gave it a swing. The big sound swelled and went off among the buildings, returning empty-handed. Thank you.
I'm going to start with my poem. It's called Katie. Joan and I had a niece that was in an adjacent building. She had just graduated from UNC the previous spring. She had been in New York for just a few days. That entire day we didn't know where she was or how she was, but she ended up being, we were profoundly blessed and lucky. She was fine. Katie. After the first plane, Katie phoned her brother. She was safe in another building. They were evacuating. DJ thought she had said the other building, the South Tower, crashed into by United Flight 175 at 9:03, moments after the line went dead. That's all Katie's mother, my sister, Marie, could tell me when I called. All we had to cling to, a single syllable separating another from other. Negligible, mere nuance, but in this case, the difference between escape and incineration. A seam notched for her in the secret ether, should she stumble into it, to pass through unharmed. To cast wider our search, Marie and I tuned to different networks, watching for Katie among the fleeing hordes. They had talked the night before about what she'd wear to her client meeting, a brown suit, a black bag. Her black hair was shorter since last I'd seen her. All day, I peered into the TV, punching the cordless. Katie's office, home cell, office, home cell, over and over, scanning faces, unraveling diabolically like smoldering newsreels smeared with hallucinatory smoke and ash. They came in ranks, wave upon wave, leagued across the avenues, the diaspora into John's apocalypse. Those still on their feet staggered. Others lay in the street, snarled in writhing weirs of fire hose. The firmament had been napalmed, orange-plumed, spooling black, volcanic stench somewhere beyond the screen, inside that television from which we all that day received like communion the new covenant for all time was my niece in her brown suit, a new haircut, her purse outfitted for her 7th day in Manhattan, her 4th day at the World Financial Center, 6 days past her 22nd birthday. I would spy her, coax her back to us through the TV's lurid circuitry, into my living room, our perfect girl, my princess. She had lost her shoes. Wandering the skewered heart of the future, finally arrived, black-hooded, afire, eerily mute toward the Upper East Side, a bus, a shared cab with an old man who befriended her, then barefoot blocks and blocks to her apartment on 89th Street, where she dialed her parents and announced with the sacrificial modesty of saints that she had made it home. You know, and with a poem, very deliberately with this poem, by Kevin Boyle, who for years was the poet in residence at Elon University in Alamance County. It's called Western Chant. Whenever I Abu Gray with you, against the grout in the shower, or take the dog, part collie, part pincher, for a short Abu Ghraib to foul the avenue, or even drink from the bowl made in heat-resistant Abu Ghraib, I often think of Abu Ghraib and how from here on out, whether I read a book of porn published in Abu Ghraib or look closely at fashion in the Times with stoic models from the thin runways of Abu Ghraib, things will be marked by those photos from Abu Ghraib. But with time, I'll relax, let my guard down, and focus on the small Abu Ghraib of the backyard and in the food we prepare, being charred at Abu Ghraib, in the clothes we wear or strip off, the teeth we chew with, filled with the silver mined in Abu Ghraib, and the miners themselves, little men with a penchant for being down the darkest shafts with canaries from the provinces of Abu Ghraib. Everything, even after years, becomes laced with Abu Ghraib. Something the dark dogs sniff out at Abu Ghraib, and my face, even when I see it with my eyes closed, is stamped Abu Ghraib, like a made in USA tag, and I lie back and see myself in Abu Ghraib. First is the happy handler yanking the chain, then is the black and white man with a studded leash around his neck, and I sense the small ray of piercing light at the end of the long colonnade is burning a hole, even if I do as I say and don't move or blink, and it burns through the skin in my shiny organs of bloat until it reaches the fortress like Abu Ghraib in the center of me. That's the point at which I hear and begin to chant Abu Ghraib to the Olympic music of USA, USA, Abu Ghraib, USA.
Good job, everybody. I remember how I know all these people, Joseph. I remember meeting you and Joan. You had just finished a stint in the Peace Corps. both of you. There's Joan, Joseph's wife. And that's pretty admirable. You have to admit, you've done a lot of good causes, but they did the Peace Corps. And I remember, Malika, we met over horses in Weymouth Center for the Arts. And you say, Shelby, that I ran up to you the first time we met and said, Shelby, I thought you were a girl. He thinks that's so funny. I don't know. In one of his poems, it sounded like a girl, you know, Shelby Stevenson. Oh, well.
Shelby, I thought you were a girl.
I thought you were a girl. And then, John, I remember when you were in the Gilbert Chapel poetry readings, and I'm glad you're back tonight. We now take some questions, and we need to mention our good staff members while we're on the subject. Emily Bird is Associate Director of the Foundation of Wayne Community College. Adrian is the Director of the Foundation. And Charlotte Brow is the Arts and Humanities Director, and we're under that umbrella right now. I'll talk to you about that in a minute. But anyway, we thank the staff for all you've done. We've had a wonderful spring series, and I'm so pleased my friends could come. And so we appreciate everything you do behind the scenes, on the scenes, everything. Are you ready for the audience to take questions, Emily?
If you have
Wait,
any,
I forgot. I said you, didn't I? Yeah.
yeah, you did. If you have a question, just raise your hand and I'll come to you.
Now, can they ask questions?
That
May
yes,
they?
anybody can ask
Okay.
questions.
Anyone who wants to ask a question, go. Of course, Liz will do this. We can always count
She's
on
our
you, Kim.
trustee.
For this generation, of course, 9/11 was that event in our lives we will never forget. For my generation, it was the assassination of John F. Kennedy. And I wondered if there were ever an anthology put together of reactions to that event and how you feel about that kind of commemoration.
I'm not aware of an anthology.
I don't know, I couldn't hear what she said.
It was, the question, Shelby, was for this current generation, I suppose young folks, 9/11 is their equivalent of maybe JFK's assassination, or Pearl Harbor for folks like my parents, and I guess lots of generations have their own kind of totemic events. I mean, the January 6th insurrection stands up there pretty high too. So the question was, is there an anthology about JFK's assassination? And I mentioned I wasn't aware of one. But I'm sure, there are myriad poems certainly about that assassination. I was in 5th grade, for instance, so David was present, he was younger, Shelby was on Earth, y'all were probably maybe a little too young to remember. But I know there are plenty of poems out there about that assassination. And MLK's assassination today, we commemorate the, what did I say, 54th anniversary, and there are lots and lots and lots of poems. And then Robert Kennedy was shot in May. There were a chain of horrifying assassinations then. Malcolm X was assassinated. Was Medgar Evers assassinated? Just so many
In his
folks.
front yard.
Sounds like there's a lot of anthologies possible for anybody who wants to take on daunting.
That would be a heavy job to put out all those anthologies, wouldn't it? And you all did it so gracefully and graciously.
I had an assignment once at the North Carolina Arts Council when we were celebrating the Civil War, you know, what was it, centennial or whatever year that was, to explore Civil War poetry. And there actually is a bunch of Civil War poetry that I pulled out of the archives downtown. I have to say they weren't very good poems, but they're there. So I think that's a natural inclination, is to respond to these traumatic events with something that sort of lifts us out of our, humanity a little bit.
I was going to say, I just did a quick Google search, didn't see one, but I think it's an excellent idea.
like I said, the first thing I turned to after 9/11 in my, I was pretty directly affected. I turned to poetry. That's what I started reading. I started reading Rumi and a lot of other poets, just to get myself out of just the brutal reality of it, and just sort of go somewhere a little bit higher. So that was definitely my inclination, for sure.
Any more questions or comments?
Yes, I forgot to say that David Potorti is my new friend, so I can now say, remember when we were at Wayne Community College one time?
And Margaret baked me a cake, which was really nice.
A big cake. Anybody else, this is it, or I'm going to start talking about refreshments?
Hold on, Margaret.
Oh, you have one.
I'm only 15, and so I wasn't alive when 9/11 occurred, and I wasn't there to witness the carnage and the despair that it caused. So what do you think is the most important lesson for people my age to learn from this collection?
Could y'all hear that? Okay.
Well, probably that it's all the same. If you look at Ukraine now, you look at Iraq, you look at Afghanistan, you look at 9/11, it's all the same. There's no difference. What's happening in Ukraine is no different than what happened in Afghanistan and Iraq. It's, we're all human beings, and it affects us all the same way. So I like to focus on we talk about civilian casualties. I guess my response would be, don't forget the civilian casualties. Most of the people who die in war are not soldiers. They're people like you and me and people in this room. Most of the people who die. So, stand up for your people. And don't forget all that loss of life that results.
We've only been really touched by two major events as far as wars are concerned, Pearl Harbor and that, on our own soil. So I think that's what we have to remember. We see these things happening in all these other countries, and it seems so distant. What we really need to remember is we're connected to all of that in so many ways, and those two times where we really felt it here, that's how those people feel, like some of these countries have felt for 100 years or more. So
Good
I
point.
think that's the lesson that we all need to remember, is that those, like Santayana said, those who don't learn from history, best prove to rebuild it, because we don't learn.
And I would dovetail with that. One insight is the concept of trauma and collective trauma. And I think, as a 15-year-old living through a pandemic, it's what do we do with this? How do we respond as human beings to each other and our suffering and the suffering of so many people around us? And I think that's so critical. And I think about when I was a religious educator, a Sunday school teacher, and they called me in to talk for the kids, of course. I was pregnant and I had a 3.5-year-old, and I had kept her away from the news, I thought. And later on, when we were all drawing and I was talking with the kids, she drew 2 rectangles with a oval. She had seen it. She'd already seen the images. And I think that you can't live as a human being and not be compelled to respond to suffering.
As a 15-year-old, too, you were born into a world at war that remains at war. So you've never, our country, we ostensibly pulled out of Afghanistan, but we're still in Iraq and we're in so many other places, too. And I don't know, maybe it goes back to some of the initial impetus for the book, that notion of the poetry of witness, it's about not forgetting. Carolyn Fortier also has an anthology called Against Forgetting. And we tend to forget and do the same thing again and again and again. And there are people tripping over landmines that were planted years and years and years ago, still in Vietnam and Cambodia, all through there. So it's hard for them to forget, because if you take the wrong step in the wrong country, you will get blown to bits. And it's happening, that very thing is happening right now in Ukraine. That very thing.
Thank you. Okay, Margaret, you want to
Okay.
wrap us up?
In other words, be quick.
No, I didn't say that.
Please join us for the autograph party in the atrium. The Goldsboro Writers Group invites you to visit the book table and have refreshments as we celebrate the book with great big letters on the biggest cake you've ever seen. Now, I don't know how many pieces you're each going to eat to get through this cake, but it's not really your fault, but it shows you how audience involvement is not what it should be. The big letters crossing the rift are on the cake, and this unbelievable cake person did this book cover on there. You won't believe it. So our poets will be there to sign your books. We have a special Goldsboro deal, 2 books for $22. The retail value of each book is $19.95. That is a very good deal. So you can look at Liz, she's already done it. You're number 1 every time. Look at Marion. Let's give them an applause. Okay. Some of our guests have brought books, their own copies of their own books to sell. And my dear friend Charlotte Brow, who's Director of Arts and Humanities, asked me to be sure to remind you that next week's program will be the last in our very successful Spring Speaker Series. An interview with famous baseball coach George Whitfield. They wouldn't let the arts wrap this thing up. No. They had to have sports. Okay, thank you. We kept you over time, but thank you for being here. Thank you so much. We'll clap for you now.